okay. So here are the major things that we wanted to cover today to understand the why of the priority standards, to review how to locate them. Most of you probably do, but I'm also going to share a few activities of what to do with them, discuss how we pace those priorities and audit, and then really review how do we understand the proficiency and clarity of those priority standards. So the why of the priority standards, I'm going to do a quick little diddly, but it actually came out of post-pandemic or July after we all shut down in March of 2020 and July of 2020. DESE brought on the New Teacher Project, a nonprofit organization who is research-based, and they said, okay, well, what you guys need to do is focus on accelerate learning. And what accelerated learning means is they were basically saying your second grader who is now going into third grade, your third grade teachers cannot go back and reteach everything they missed in second grade. You have to move forward with third grade standards. And by the way, you still can't cover all of those because we know that there's going to be gaps. So that's where they said you're going to need to prioritize in every grade level what those key learning blocks need to be, and then just move forward. And then they said, once those are identified, you need to scaffold kids up. So rather than going back and covering every single missed learning skill a child might need, you're going to look at, okay, if they have to know main idea, I'm only going to fill in the gaps and skills related to that priority standard. I like to share that because I don't think a lot of teachers really know. It's just, here we go again with the state. They've thrown this at us. And I like teachers to really know it came out of a response to the pandemic of trying to help prioritize standards. Teachers are still responsible for teaching all of their standards, but now we have these key priorities. If we were going to accelerate learning, these are the ones that you should teach for mastery. Then the state said what's on the slide here. And hey, by the way, not only should those be your focus, we're going to eventually transition all of your state MAP and EOC assessments to primarily be over the priority standards. So by 2024, they predict 80 to 90% of the MAP and EOC assessments will be over those priorities. What we found at elementary is that's already occurring. So there hasn't been much shift to the test. In secondary, they are still shifting the blueprint. And it's kind of been a bone of contention for some of the districts we've worked with who've switched over to priorities. Some of their EOCs haven't looked like that yet, but the state has told us in the next year or two, they should be primarily priorities. So that's why we're here focusing on it today. I always think it's nice to do the why because it doesn't just feel like some other thing. And then the other thing is to remember, what is curriculum? What I like to say, it's the great curriculum myth that when you ask many teachers what curriculum is, we typically tend to say a resource name, right? Wonders McGraw-Hill, or I use this textbook, when really at the heart of it, and this is Marzano's definition, that a guaranteed curriculum, it's this idea that we provide a kid probability of success for college. But in Missouri, they voted on what that success criteria is, and that's our standards. So a lot of Missouri teachers don't realize, because nobody tells us, I was that teacher, this just hit me about 5 years ago, that when you sign that contract, you sign on to say, I will teach these Missouri learning standards. That's what brings the equity across Missouri. So if we're not teaching those, or we're using a resource that doesn't cover those, we're not truly providing a guaranteed curriculum. So the guarantee is that you are teaching your standards. Okay. So this relates to this work today. You have to have a plan to help your teachers know we're teaching the standards, and the viability is we have a plan of how we're actually going to do that. That's realistic. So curriculum is very much standards and not resources. And I think that's an important thing to clear up at the beginning of this work of why we're looking at the priority standards. So step one would be, so this is an example of a typical curriculum document that I found in district. So once you know, and I'm going to show you here in a second, how to get to the priority standards, you really need to help teachers not only review that document, but be able to look inside their current curriculum and see, where do the priority standards lie? Are we even covering them? And so this one's not so clear. I'm going to give you some other documents to help it look more clearly, but I'd like to pause right now on the call where are you guys at with this process? Because I might skip. Do you know where to find the priority standards? Are you just looking at what are activities we can do with them? Have you started any work looking in your current work for the priorities?
Our priorities, we've been just trying to get them aligned vertically. So yeah, we know where they are. We're just looking by grade levels to help them get vertically aligned.
Okay. Anybody else on the call? All right, we'll keep going. Let's see. There's the slide that I was looking for. So if you have already found the priority standards, and you want to just do some high level things with them, I thought it's because I'm old, but even new people like hard copies. Okay, we do so much electronically, but I would say print those things out, give them the old fashioned highlighter and let them go through and look at that list. And I think you could say, are there any, you could even give them, make a square around those that are a surprise, highlight the things that are totally new that you haven't typically covered. Does this make sense? And just give them an opportunity, because I think sometimes it is kind of shocking for teachers. I worked with a district recently who already had priority standards, then the state came in to do them. And so one of the things we did was provide them a document that showed them, okay, if it's green, it's where it was something you chose and what the state said. And then we made in yellow if it's new. Does that make sense? Like helping them see what we had compared to what's completely new. And with math, a great activity I love to do is have them look at their priority standards. There are very much some big topics in math, like fractions in fourth grade. You better like fractions because it's happening there. But what we do with them is have them take a look and write on chart paper, what are the big measurement topics? So Glenita, you mentioned this vertical alignment, and this is a great activity for that, where you can write their key things there and then have people do a gallery walk. Okay, third grade is a lot of multiplication and division. Fourth grade is a lot of fractions. And what they start seeing is a gap. Second grade is the only one who's got money written on there. So remember, we have to always remember that these are recommended priority standards and anchoring teachers. And oh my goodness, there's this big shift. So money only shows up in second grade, KN1. It's not a priority at the state, but you probably need to do something to help these people out. So it's just a great idea to try to help them quantify the big topics and look at that vertically to see sometimes you have to come up with other priority standards in your district. Like KN1 should have money as a priority. Sorry, I'm a first grade teacher. You got to be doing coins. You got to be looking at a clock. It's not on there, but those would be ones that we would recommend to let teachers have those conversations and understand we still have some agency here. We don't have to let go everything we know to be good, because those priority standards are not infallible, but they're recommended and we have to stick to them because we know we'll be assessed on them. But sometimes we vertically need to support each other. So those are a few activities you could go back and do with teachers, but they really actually enjoy and have great conversations about to kind of dive in. Then it's to this point of, okay, another strategic thing we could do is look at your current curriculum. Where do they actually fall? Are we even covering them? And it's this idea of identifying where they are, and we have to make sure that we pace them. So one of the things I'm going to ask you to consider is, if you are a district who is heavy in a resource, to consider having your teachers pace their priority standards to the resource. And here's what I mean by that. Have them look inside their resource and see what Missouri priority standards are taught, assessed in Unit 1. Helping them make this connection. Resources are not bad, they're great, but what we're wanting to do is to drive the standard using the resource to help teachers cover the standard. And what they might find in these activities is that sometimes my resource doesn't cover any priority standards. And we need to know that, because there are lessons in that resource we could leave out. Here's a math high school example. I was working with a lady in a smaller school, and she said, I've used this textbook for 15 years. This is my Algebra 1 curriculum. Very normal. And I said, okay, well, here's your priority standards, look at them. So she did this process and she called me over and said, well, I have a big problem. This textbook doesn't start covering any priority standards till chapter 4. And there's 5 or 6 that it never gets to. Does this make sense? So it's really important for teachers to audit their resource. Isn't even doing, sometimes we think, hey, the publisher tells you we're aligned to your state. So we're like, great, I'll just follow along with you. But really what's happening is they're not even covering all the things. And so this type of activity is really powerful for your teachers to know. There are sometimes lessons we don't do in our resource. There are sometimes lessons or units we have to add. It's okay to use a resource, but sometimes you have to even tweak it to look more like the state standard. And so we help teachers, and a clear format that we like to use is, where we have our unit and you're clearly saying in this unit, this is a priority and this is a supporting. I want to show you an example of someone else who has done this work. This is actually to Eureka Math. A lot of districts use that, and they did this activity, right? We looked in each module in Eureka and found where the priority standards landed. And I'm going to give you a moment, even if you're on my team, you make a comment here. So I'm tired of talking. I got to do a break time. Anything you notice when looking at this that might be a good aha for teachers? Specifically in module 2 and 6.
We don't have any priority standards in module 6, so that's concerning. And you only have one in module 2.
And look at the pacing.
Right.
Too. So you see how this work is helpful. I would never tell a district, don't do Eureka Math, but what you need to know is, where do your priorities fall out in that? Eureka Math says take 25 days. Well, that's just one priority. So I'd change your days. I change your amount of days. I would switch module 6 with module 7. I would move module 7 up because it has a lot more priority standards. And I mean, this was a big off. He's like, oh, collecting data. Now that was only a 10-day unit, so it's not like it, but does this make sense? So I just wanted to give this visual of these are the types of ahas we're wanting teachers to see, so you can start auditing and seeing the gaps in your programming, or you feel really good about the things that it is doing. But I think sometimes curriculum purists will have teachers just pace out their priorities rather than helping. And then they'll say, now go back and skip around in your resource to hit them. That doesn't work well, especially in reading, because sometimes, oh, this priority was covered in unit 4. Well, you can't start. Your resource is written sequentially to build off itself as well. So it's really hard to bounce around in a resource. So I just think it works well to audit your resource there. And so then you're just going to modify the amount of time that you spend on it. You're going to cut out lessons in that unit, but you're going to follow the cadence that it's using. Questions or thoughts about this idea of pacing, auditing, and pairing? Okay, so provide priority standard clarity. Again, I'm just trying to give you a visual example. You could set this up differently, but I think it's really nice when we talk about the viability for a teacher to see over the course of the year, here are my units, here are what my big deals are, and here are my supporting, because we're still responsible for every standard, not just priority. So they need to know, and then here, we like to make it a landing page, right? One of the things I've seen as a state consultant is, oh my goodness, sometimes I'll ask teachers to pull something up and they pull it up 5 different ways in 5 different documents and they get lost in a sea of folders. So on this particular example, we have all the core state documents hyperlinked right up here for teachers. You want them, even the original priority standards document, you want them at a glance to be able to see, here's your roadmap of how you're going to attack these things this year. But then you can start hyperlinking in the assessment resources. So they really have a nice landing page. Imagine, I always ask this question, how many of you walked into teaching and didn't have anything? So I'm not going to ask it here because we all know the answer. But imagine even systemically for veteran to new people, having this system where someone could walk in and clearly know what to do. I think that gives our profession a bad name because we have bad systems, and we should be having this for every person who walks in the door. Hi, welcome. We're actually going to tell you what you should be doing here today, rather than putting you on the curriculum team to develop it. So I just really encourage you to consider pacing this and having these common systems for teachers. So once they've taken a dive, they kind of understand the priorities, and we've paced them. We understand how we could actually fold them into what we're already doing. And we've said, okay, here's the gaps. Here's what we're going to do to make sure we cover all of them. Now we need to understand the proficiency of that standard. And the problem has been, so here are the documents that DESE and that we would recommend that you're looking at. Item specifications. They have the priority standards in them, and they've tried to say, here's sample stems and what they should look like. If you're not familiar with the MOLEAT blocks for social studies and science, I would highly encourage you to use those. Those are great exemplars of what instruction should look like. And then they're old, but still relevant. Those map released items really give you clarity on the types of questions and how they ask that content. So I'm not going to make us, since we're not too chatty today, I'm not going to make us do this activity, but we'll kind of talk through. Here's an example of a 3rd grade standard. Develop and demonstrate reading in response to text by drawing conclusions and supporting it with textual evidence. Great. And this is talking about standard confusion. This is very subjective. When you ask teachers, write a question that a proficient 3rd grader should be able to do. If we ask 6 people, how many different types of questions would we get? Usually 6 different ones. And McGraw-Hill has an interpretation, and Benchmark, all these different. And so who do we really care about how they ask proficiency? Because, so here's an example. Here's a typical, let's see, I skipped over it. I guess I left out my typical question, but a typical question might be, look at the story, which piece of evidence supports this claim, and they choose one. Another person could say, read this passage. Here are 3 pieces of evidence. Which of the following would be the best conclusion? Right? Like the rigor in all of those can be very different. And so we really want to help anchor teachers, but what kind of level of rigor does the state suggest? And so here's an example of a MOLEAT block for that question. It says, evaluate source 2 and use your knowledge of social studies to answer the question. What's significant about the location of Missouri's capital city? Well, that's totally, I don't think any of us would have come up with that. They're actually using this standard, drawing conclusions in a nonfiction text. And if you double clicked on that, you would see they're having kids read a map, and it doesn't explicitly tell them what's significant. They have to notice that there's some rivers running next to it. Does this make sense? So sometimes when we don't have clarity, we want, one, we're probably not putting enough nonfiction in front of kids, and they're going to see that a lot with different sources. So it helps bring teacher clarity to when we look at those DESE items, we need to know, well, how are they asking it to make sure that we're even getting to the rigor that kids are supposed to do? Because we think, oh yeah, I ask inferencing and drawing conclusion questions. But then we see, oh, but that's a very much higher level thinking, because they're having to look at a nonfiction source. The information is not explicit, it's implicit. There's background knowledge they needed to know. So this common standard confusion, in my opinion, is why we have the gaps in proficiency that we do. Teachers aren't clear of what they were supposed to be teaching to. We think we're doing it, and we think our textbook is doing it. And then we look at these examples and we find out, oh, shoot, it's not. So we would remind you to go back. Again, that was just an example from a MOLEAT block. Have teachers be looking at these items. What are the examples we're seeing to help get a feel for what does that rigor really look like? Because that might mean I'm using, trying to pick on a different Hoofton Mifflin, and I need to rearrange that question to be a bit more rigorous. What I thought was a 3 is really a level 2, and we need to change them, because if your teachers have clarity, and we like to start with assessment, after you've paced them, because we want your teachers to be clear on what proficiency looks like so they can backward design those lessons and tweak them. Now I'm going to do a shameless plug. I'm trying to share with you all the things that you can do to help your districts. One of the things that our company does offer is that we have done some of that heavy lifting for you, and that we've created some of these scales where we've unwrapped and we put those sample questions right there for teachers. So a teacher could easily see, this is what level 4 means. And they could easily see, okay, here are examples of level 3 questions. We found that we have a typical proficiency scale on the left-hand side where it's unwrapped and they can read it. But what we found, true clarity comes when teachers can see those assessment questions. And so I just want to let you know, if you're on this journey, there is finally a Missouri specific tool that could help you do that. And then we didn't get into it today, but on our level 2, we also try to help teachers. The other $1 million thing is, okay, now I'm clear on the rigor because I've got these questions to help me, but man, I've got kids who can't get there and I don't know what else to do because I keep repeating it. And it's not, they're not picking it up. So we would also suggest for the scaffolding that we've really tried to go through and unwrap those cognitive strategies kids would need to know for teachers and give them some visuals of, well, you need to go back and stair step and build them up because we believe teachers just need a Missouri specific resource because of those gaps. So again, I'm trying to show you things where you could do this work on your own. We basically have just condensed it and beefed it up. When you get to math for K through 2, there's not really any item specifications. So in our book, we've written those because we think teachers really need to see how it vertically builds. And then one other, when you're pacing, if that's something you're overwhelmed with, something we also offer is we do have, and you can do this as well, but we make a tab where we list a teacher's standards already, and we've already got them color coded for the state. So all they have to do is copy and paste them into the template, because anything we can do to help teachers' lives easier, we want to do. You'll also notice on that standard tab how they're hyperlinked because we have these tools hyperlinked right into it. So when they want to know what that standard means, they could double click and that's there. That is something you could do. With competency-based learning, you're going to need proficiency scales and you're going to need those paced. And so we're really just trying to provide you. So just know there's options out there. If this seems overwhelming, especially for our smaller districts, sometimes these can be good examples. I also, if you're near the Kansas City area, we're going to be offering some half days where we're going over, we're giving people a copy of our book and we're really diving in that way, because sometimes the easiest way is not pulling all those documents, right? We're trying to give people a book and really show them. Then we get into, well, let's look at this question. What do you think it is? Now look at your tool. It really expedites their understanding of assessment and helps with that. So those are some opportunities. If you're thinking, okay, you've told me what documents to do, but I'm still a little overwhelmed, those would be some other options as well. So
Shauna, can I jump in just real quick? Hey, I'm Sue Herrera. I'm a newly retired principal, and I would just say, I did use the proficiency scales and the priority standards, and Sean is absolutely right. It was like Christmas when I handed the book to the teachers, because it is hours and hours and hours if you sit and you go through everything on DESI. Not that you can't do it, and you might have time to do it, but our time was just so much better spent once we could see what proficiency was, understood exactly where the priority standards lied within our pacing and how was it going to be assessed. We were able to then focus on bigger things like culture and climate and just moving the building forward. So it was really a wonderful tool for us.
awesome. Thank you for sharing. So to summarize today, we would just encourage you, create the why behind the priority standards, give some time to review and analyze, audit your current curriculum to those pacing guides, utilize state resources or other things if you'd like, and then, time. come on, we wish we had more of it, but the time for teachers to really have that to reflect and adjust. One of the biggest, I'm dating myself because Common Core happened. And I remember working at district office, and because I was at district office, I could study those standards. And then I'd go into classrooms, and what did I notice? Had instruction changed? No, because we didn't understand how the standards were different. And so that's just my greatest call to you is we have to give teachers time to understand what those standards mean, because I think we're getting a bad rap as a teaching profession and students because it's kind of systemic problems. We haven't had clear pacing guides for everybody. We're asking them to constantly redo it, and we haven't given them what they need to have clarity. And if a teacher knows the target, guess what? They'll probably teach it. Problem is we just don't know the target. And so that's the call of this work today, is to try to help them have clarity, because we want to keep them in here. We need good teachers. So thank you so much. I will stop this presentation. If you're on the call and you have questions, I'm happy to answer them.